Welcome to Right People Right Now, a process for making multiple hires. I'm Cindy Gay from the Metis Group, and some of you had already attended our Ready, Hire, Aim. Just because your competition hires this way doesn't mean you should. And in that session, we looked at a process for hiring and selecting superstars for roles in leadership or even in significant independent contributor roles. We did talk about the fact that sometimes we have unskilled or semi-skilled laborers that we're trying to bring on board, and that protracted process, while it's fine for a professional level position, just doesn't work when we have to hire people right now. So before we get going into this, I want to turn the microphone, so to speak, over to Dick Ott, who wanted to say a couple of words.
Good. Thank you, Cindy. Glad to see everybody here. We have participants from England, from throughout Canada, and throughout the USA, Northeast, Southeast, Midwest, West, Northwest, and a couple of several provinces in Canada. So welcome, everybody. We are delighted to put on this webinar today. And I wanted to go ahead and thank James Green for all his help getting this organized, and as well as Jordan Law that works with Cindy for getting it organized with them. We've got a great group. This is Cindy's third time that she's speaking with NIN. The first time was for those of you that were at the Sales Partner Retreat in Charlotte. She gave a stimulating 3-hour session, kept everybody awake, and there were a lot of take-homes from that. So many takeaways that we invited her to speak at the Operations Summit in St. Louis last month with some owners, some operators, some ops managers, some service managers. Today, as she said, we're really talking about the people side of our business again. Her tagline for her company at the Metis Group is behavior experts at work. And we have had her back again because of your number one pain point this year is demand for maintenance, demand for installations, demand for green walls has rebounded from an anemic state last year to full, robust sales this year. Our biggest challenge, you have told us, is finding the right people, putting them in the right seat on the bus and getting them up to speed as quickly as we can. Cindy has a great process that she's going to walk through today, and I think you'll have some takeaways. So with that, welcome, Cindy. We're glad to have you. And welcome back.
Thanks so much, Dick. I appreciate it. I've come to love the NIN group. I think you're a lot of fun folks to work with. A couple of other things, kind of housekeeping-ish. You all are the very first to experience the Demio platform that we've embraced for our webinar. We've done webinars in GoToMeeting and Zoom and some things like this. And we're glad to see that there's some young upstarts that are giving the other big boys some competition. And don't be surprised that at the end, we're going to introduce a poll to get some feedback as to how you liked interacting with this particular platform. Things about, how hard was the registering and things like this. And if you don't remember how hard the registration was, that means it must have been pretty good and pretty easy, because we all remember nightmarish ones. So I'll ask you to give us your feedback as we make plans for future webinars. I'm going to share my screen again so that we can view the slides together. You will have them available in handouts as well. So feel free to download those if you wish, and there will be a recording of this available for you too. So right people right now, a process for making multiple hires. Typically, we see this in positions like unskilled and semi-skilled labor. it's, even though we make multiple hires for like nurses or teachers, we might still have a longer process for them. That would be our other presentation. But frequently when we have to make these quick decisions, we originally started this when we were looking at hospitality positions like servers or people who work front of house in a hotel or things like this, where somebody walks in and you got to be able to make that decision right then. And part of that is we've had this enormous competition with everybody hiring. So if you don't hire this superstar right now, they'll walk across the street and get hired. But the challenge is, how do we know whether or not they really are that good? And we're under this enormous time constraint. And we're feeling it from the hiring managers who feel like, I got to have more bodies, as well as, the pressure once we're facing someone. I have to tell you, back in a previous life, I was the head of HR for a property management company, and we managed apartment communities all over the country. And we, in particular, had one in Texas that was always a challenge for us. And I remember getting a call from the manager there saying, Cindy, I really, really, really need a good leasing consultant. It's so hard to come by one. Please don't make me do a background check on this woman who just came in. She looked so lovely. She had on a white linen suit with a lovely pink silk blouse and a little strand of pearls, and she carried herself so well, and she was going on and on about the interview. She said, please don't make me waste more time doing the background check. Well, mind you, I of course insisted that she still do the background check. Darn good thing, on her resume there were a couple of gaps in employment, and we found that was because she was serving time for armed robbery. So had we not taken that time, we would have been handing over the keys to how many people's homes for her to go check. So having a process that you feel confident in is really good. You're not giving over the keys to somebody's personal home to people who are typically being processed through the right people right now approach. Many of you may recognize some of the logos on this. These are just a sampling of some of the clients with whom we do business. Some of them are much smaller that you might not have heard of before, and other ones obviously have more of a national presence. So I want to talk about our candidate selection matrix. And of course, down at the bottom on our x-axis, we have all of the hard skills. And on the left, we have the soft skills in the y-axis on that vertical line. So of course, we would all want to hire somebody in Q2. That's where they're really strong on the hard skills and they're really strong on the soft skills. Who wouldn't want to hire a current superstar? But remember what the labor market's like, right? I think right now we're hovering around 3.5, 3.6% nationally. I did understand that Milwaukee is down to like 2.7% unemployment. So that makes it a little tough. And then, of course, it's easy to not hire the folks in Q3. They don't really have many hard skills and they don't have any soft skills either. They basically have absolutely nothing. So we should be avoiding them at all costs. The next choice is really tough. And that is when we're torn between the folks in Q4 where they're really strong on the hard skills, but they come up short on the soft skills. And we call them our future headaches because we really can't move them from the bottom right up to the top right. There's nothing you can do to really help them appreciate your culture, to bleed your core values, to really go that extra mile and have the soft skills that make them that superstar employee. But then, of course, we have folks who are really strong on the soft skills, and we'll call it that they have enough of the hard skills that it's permission to play. So you might have an accountant working for an accounting firm. They have to have an accounting degree, right? That would be permission to play, but maybe they don't have a lot of experience. But with experience or some training, we can get them over from top left to top right. And the idea is your opportunity, your real competitive advantage is if you can focus on all of the soft skills that would make somebody a future superstar, what are the minimal hard skills that they really have to have coming in, and you can train them the rest of the way and move them over to that top right. So we typically ask folks, so why do you think organizations get seduced into hiring these future headaches? And that's really because it's easy to figure out. You just look at their resume and you can see what's there. People also get sucked into that because I need somebody now and they already have the hard skills, they can hit the ground running. The other challenge with focusing on Q1 is, gosh, how do we figure out if they have the right soft skills? So this process is going to start with getting clear about the soft skills that we're really looking for. And as Pat Lencioni has said, companies who hire exclusively for hard skills will fire for the soft skills every time. So here's our Select Advantage acceleration process for right people right now. It's a little bit different for those of you who may remember the Select Advantage process for more professional or leadership level positions. But again, this will be in your slide deck if you want to download this a little bit later on the handouts. This creating an avatar piece is the first step. And for those of you who were in the other session, you may remember my analogy. If you think about how much you typically pay this person, you know, even if it's $10 an hour, that's a little over $20,000 a year. If you were going to spend $20,000 on a piece of hardware or a piece of software, nobody in their right mind would take $20,000 of hard, cold cash, walk into Best Buy, lay it on the counter and say, hey, what can I get for this? That's when we get talked into all that stuff that never works when we get back. So you would take that group of people who you know maybe have worked with something similar in the past, maybe they will be impacted positively or negatively, depending on how well it works when it's brought in. And you would lock them in a conference room and say, you all aren't coming out till you figure out what do we have to have in this hardware, software, what do we need to have? And then you would go out shopping for it, knowing nothing was going to be perfect. But if you have the criteria of what you really need, then you can come back and say, so is this a deal breaker? Can we create a workaround? And our process starts the same way. If we get clear about that definition up front, about what the ideal person looks like in this job, the better off we can be. So when we talk about identifying the job, this one might be a little difficult at first because it's a singular job. A lot of times people think it's an entry-level position. Once they're in here, we'll figure out where to put them. But that doesn't necessarily mean people are interchangeable. So as an example, I asked Art Campbell to give me an idea of some of the positions that might fit this. And some of the ones he talked about were plant maintenance technicians. That might be a very different type of avatar, ideal person, than the person who's doing the holiday production and decorating inside organizations. That might take a little bit of a different person than the other. Or somebody who's doing the installation of plants, containers, green walls, and moss walls inside versus seasonal help for external installations and maintenance. So we'd actually have to have a conversation about how do we really want to break this up. But once we identify what job we want to work at, let's say plant maintenance technician, then we would ask you within your organization, because it does need to be by organization if we can get the culture right, who do you think are your superstar performers? Like at least 3 to 5 of them. So if you can tell us who your superstars are, we can give them each about a 15-minute assessment on both DISC, which tells us what their behaviors are, and workplace motivators, which help us understand what gives them gratification in their work and what makes them really a culture fit. So I'll explain a little bit more about the differences between those two in a moment. This allows us to look at trends among your top performers. When we are actually describing what we're seeing in those trends to the hiring manager and or HR person, we can look at then what the manager thinks needs to be modified. Because if you remember, nobody's perfect. And if you have one of your top performers, one of your absolute superstars is John, and I'm going through it and said, oh, but I see this one characteristic that I'm surprised that isn't a problem for you guys. And the manager might say, oh yeah, we see that, but we're willing to tolerate that because the rest of John is awesome. And so I say, oh, okay, so that may not be a characteristic we really want to seek in the next person. And then we may look at Jordan and say, oh, Jordan looks really cool, but this one piece looks like an outlier compared to everybody else. Yeah, that piece is a little missing, but everything else about Jordan's awesome. Okay, so that allows us to have some context, and it allows the manager to talk about the preferences and the characteristics that they see, which are most important. And then finally, one of our senior advisors can provide some human behavior expertise to say, based on what we can tell about the job, these are the characteristics we would say you really want to focus on for this role. That's how we build the avatar then. And we will weight each of these three: the top performers' results, the manager's preferences, and the human behavior expertise. And I'll show you that in a little bit more. That allows you then to develop a recruiting strategy. When we describe the behavior characteristics that we're looking for, and when you go to post the position, if you describe more the person you're looking for rather than the job you want them to do, it's going to resonate with people who are looking at it. Or if you're asking for referrals, it brings to mind the types of people who are good. So let's pretend, and I'm going to go way out here on a limb, we're looking for a plant maintenance technician. Well, if you start telling me what a plant maintenance technician does in a job posting, I don't really know. But if you say things like people who love to make things grow, who have an incredible attention to detail, who are wonderful at understanding the nuances between too much and too little when it comes to the attentiveness a particular plant's getting, or things like this, that's going to give somebody a little bit of a better idea, as opposed to water plants, trim dead leaves, prune back worn blossoms, whatever. So it's going to be phrased differently if we really describe the characteristics we're looking for. Once we have defined this avatar, we also provide you with the interview questions that tie to the characteristics this will have identified as being most critical, and that allows you to recruit the superstars. When you're screening them, then you can use the interview questions that we provided you up front when they come in. And the whole idea, if you can think of it this way, is that when a superstar comes in to see you, if you don't hire that superstar when they're there in front of you, they're going to walk across the street and get another job. So how do I make a decision, an informed decision, before they leave? Well, the first thing is, when they come in, you can sit them down and spend some time with them asking the questions that we're handing you that pertain to the job at hand. If you come away feeling, I think this guy's pretty good, you can simply walk that person over to a computer or hand them an iPad that allows them to click on one link and allows them to take an assessment, which they'll do in 15 minutes or less. That allows you, and I'll show you a comparison report that you'll get to say, oh, well, there's one or two questions that are maybe not an ideal match. So you can walk back into that interview room, ask the rest of those questions in those categories to decide, is this a fit or not? Before the person has ever left, you will have that information probably in the space of 45 minutes from the time they walk in to the time they walk out. It allows you, again, to really look at the whole person and not worry about just the feeling you get about that individual. So as we come back here, you'll see then that you can compare candidates against the job, rate them or score them, follow up in the interview to probe, as I said. Then in the hiring, there can be a self-discovery if you wanted to do some onboarding with that person to help them develop and grow in those areas where it may not have been an ideal match. I'm sorry about that. So how do we build the perfect avatar? As I said, we need to start with selecting your top performers. But again, I challenge you to think about, if people really are interchangeable among jobs, or if you know this person does this job a little bit differently and better than this person does this job, that might mean those are two separate jobs. And then we'll look at superstars within each of those roles. Then again, we'll sit down with the hiring manager and we'll be able to go over that with them and get the hiring manager preferences in. And then, of course, we'll provide some behavior expertise. When we combine those three, we can customize it to determine what's the ideal avatar for you, because it will be different. Even though many of you may do the same type, have the same types of businesses, it will vary based on the individuals and the culture of your organization. So as an example, normally to the right here, there are several other columns that list out the scores of each individual superstar that you said you wanted to identify as your top performers. The averages are then listed here. And what happens is, in this particular case, we decided, this was a sample from a real profile. It was decided to give 65% of the weight to our avatar to the top performer score, give about 25% of the weight to the manager, and about 15% to the behavior expertise. The really cool thing about this particular DISC assessment is the hiring manager does not need to be an expert in DISC. They don't need to be DISC certified. They don't even have to be able to spell DISC. Doesn't matter. Because in the old days, you had to know, as an example, if you're looking at interaction down here, the second from the bottom, that's a combination of a high I and a low S. You don't have to worry about that. You just look, we need a lot of interaction with people. That's one of our biggies. Or frequent change is going to be high D, low S. Customer oriented is going to be a high S and a high I. So you don't have to worry about those combinations. As part of this, we're dealing with 12 behavior hierarchies. This is just a sampling. And so when we look at our top performers and we look at our manager's weight and the TMG best practices, we can come up with an ideal score. And then the range, the desired range, would be plus or minus 10 points off of that. Okay, that would be the ideal. Once we have the behaviors identified, then we can look at the motivators. So someone with a high aesthetic has an appreciation of form and function, and they have an appreciation of all five senses. So it tends to be very experiential. You will see probably some of those high aesthetics being drawn to some of the decorating. If there are some things that they have the opportunity to make decisions on color or how things are placed from a height perspective or colors of planters or whatever, that high aesthetic may be higher for some of those positions. If they're working individually, and individualistic where they get to call the shots may be more important. If they have to work as a team, we may need this lower. So we will look at these 6 motivators and say, which of these is going to give people gratification in their work? Because that's what gets them to really stick around. And again, it's the same type of thing. What do we want in our top performers, our managers, our best practices? We come up with an ideal score and then a range. Once that is complete, then we can look at, this was a field technician that we did for a service role in fire safety and suppression. And so we needed somebody who was very detail oriented. These were the things that were very critical right at the top. We needed somebody who was very team oriented, because some of those things that were competitive and things like this ranked lower at the bottom. So we not only know what are some of the desired traits, but what are some of the traits we probably want to avoid. We needed somebody with a bottom line focus, and we needed somebody who could actually take control while they were out there and make some tough decisions relative to the safety of a particular building. These were folks who were actually evaluating the safety and checking the fire suppression stuff, even in nuclear power plants and in schools. So very important. As I mentioned earlier, once we know what's critical will give you the behavior-based interview questions to those roles. So in this particular case, this analysis of data, which is also following established methods and rules consistently, organized workplace, the ability to work independently, to focus on details and precision, and consistency, the ability to do the job repetitively the same way with predictable accuracy. So if you had questions like these for each of the categories, you would have 5 behavioral categories and 3 motivator categories that were absolutely critical for your job. In your first round of interviews, you'd ask 1 or 2 questions from each of the categories. That allows you then, if you're asking 1 or 2 questions from each of those 8 categories, you're going to get a pretty good feel for whether or not this person seems pretty good. And then when you walk them over to the iPad or the computer and they take the assessment in 15 minutes, you get the results back. You can simply write in Sarah's name up here and her scores, and then you can look to see if her scores fall within the desired range. If persistence, it fell out, and social, it fell out of range, you can go back in and ask the rest of the questions in those 2 categories that she didn't already answer, to see how this plays out in real life. Because if you have a candidate who has a pretty good self-awareness and has been working on improving things a little bit at a time, or has developed some coping mechanisms, it'll help you understand how things play out in real life. So just because it's not a perfect match doesn't mean it's not going to be a superstar for you, or if they're committed to development. A little case study we have one of our favorite clients has a microbrew, and they wanted to look at the servers and bartenders there. Interestingly enough, the first thing that we learned was they tried to put servers and bartenders in the same category, and we realized those were 2 very different jobs for a number of reasons. One of the biggies is all the serving on the floor is team serving, where the bartender gets to be the only bartender behind the bar. There's a little bit more independence, a little bit more status, and so that's requiring a different person that's all on the team. The other thing that we found out is on the team that they share tips. And so somebody with a very strong sense of independence is not really going to like, A, that I got to work with a team, and B, my money is dependent on how well the rest of the team does. So that was a challenge. One of the other things that surprised us, we thought going into it that there was a good chance that aesthetic was going to be higher because of how great the beer tastes and smells and things like this. And we actually found the difference between their great and their good performers was this theoretical was in the number 1 spot. They had a passion for acquiring knowledge and truth. They just loved to learn things. So if you've ever been to a microbrewery, you know you can't go in there and order the name of a beer that you had at the other microbrewery. It doesn't work that way. You can go in and say, you know, I kind of like IPAs that aren't so hazy, not so fruity, whatever. And then they say, oh, then you have to try this. Wait, do you taste the way this, we make it this way, we do this, this is how we finish it off, this is why it's presented in this glass. And they just know everything about it. And it was that high theoretical, that ability to get excited about all the details of how the stuff was made, that was the biggest difference between their superstars and their okay performers. We never would have guessed that had we not really looked at the superstars who existed. We also, of course, needed people who were super friendly and the ability to juggle lots of priorities. But we did find when it was somebody who was good in the server role, that need to have that recognition and be more independent and calling the shots really needed to be towards the bottom and the theoretical at the top. And as you became a server, we could deal with that level of independence being much higher. So that was the presentation that I wanted to go over today. If you go to the QR reader, you can download some of the slides. We're also, are we going to launch a poll, John? We're going to try to launch a poll to see if you can give us some feedback on the presentation as well as this software. And I believe the chat is open. in the event you'd like to make any comments or ask any questions. Oh, maybe I load the poll?
Yes.
No. Well, so much for using the polls. John, are there any questions or comments in the chat?
There's a poll that just popped up.
Oh, now it just popped up. Okay. So if you all wouldn't mind, how did you like this webinar software? Liked it a lot. Same as Zoom or other platforms. It was a pain. I like Zoom or GoToWebinar much better. All right. So we are getting some great responses in. And it looks like all of you can see the responses coming in as well. All right, so good information. Two people liked Zoom and GoToWebinar better, but it looks like the rest of them liked this a lot or didn't find it any better or worse than Zoom. So that's good to know. Great. Were there any other polls or was that it?
No, that was it.
That was it.
Some comments in the chat. There weren't
Okay.
any questions that were specific.
Any comments in the chat we should know about or address? I don't have the capacity to see those. Okay. Well, now I'm going to stop sharing my screen and ask Dick Ott to join me again. He's going to join me on stage, as they say. Here he comes.
Hey.
Okay, Cindy. Thank you.
Thank you.
This is as part of our best practices. This is a really good best practice in the HR side of the world, and we're really big at NIN on defined processes and defined procedures, and this certainly fits right in that mold of having this process, having it down and step by step, and whether you're having to hire right immediately or you do have some time, depending on the situation and the particular company and open position, you can use this differently. It was interesting to see your quadrant 1, 2, 3, and 4. I thought I was back in my time management quadrant 1, quadrant 2, quadrant 3, quadrant
yes,
4.
Yes.
And it's a good extension of that by looking at your future superstars and how to get them over to the current superstars and move them over into that. So there's a lot of good practicality here, and we'll figure out some next steps from this together and get these out to everybody. When do you think we'll have the recording available that James will be able to send out either to the current attendees or the folks that could not attend?
I'm guessing it's going to be later today or tomorrow.
Okay.
And I know we had someone who said something about they missed the first part. So, and Dick, as you warned me, this was a late arriving group. So we knew we were going to have to record it and make that available for everybody. So I would say the latest sometime tomorrow. And of course, if anybody has any questions or would like some follow-up discussion and how to do something like this for your organization, you know how to find me.
Very good. Thank you. And James will get all this out to everybody, the attendees and the non-attendees, and the 8 different time zones that attendees are operating on today. So thank you, everybody, for attending. Thank you, Cindy, for a job well done and creating a definite process and questions, etc. So we'll have some follow-up on this. And with that, I do want to mention that we have just scheduled, and James will get out today, that our next event is going to be in Chicago in September. And it's going to be 5 minutes from O'Hare Airport. So
Nice.
for those that are traveling, that's a good hub to connect with. For those that are within driving range, that'll be special. The big headliner for Chicago is going to be, it's one of the few markets that we have two partners in. And we're going to visit each of the two partners who do business very, very differently, and both are very successful. So it'll give you a good opportunity to view up close and personal who they are, what they do, how they do it, all the nuts and bolts, and look at their processes and their procedures. So we're excited about it, and we are thankful, Cindy, that this is your third time with us. We look forward to doing more with you in the future, and just keep smiling and passing on that good information.
Will do. Thank you all so much.
Hit
Have
them
a great
long,
one.
hit them long, and hit them straight.
That's the game plan. Thanks.
Thank you. Good day.
You too.